I'll try to answer that kind of directly. So the addiction itself, what ibogaine it does for people is a few things. One of the main ones is the short-term effect of it cutting out the withdrawal symptoms. So in the study that we did, and also in the New Zealand study, we showed that the withdrawal symptoms are reduced very significantly from what they would be if you hadn't had opioids in that period. So it takes away those withdrawal symptoms for the vast majority of people who use it, and that gives people a chance to stop using. So clearly the people who are going in and getting treated are motivated to stop using, but they need to be able to get past that withdrawal period. And ibogaine really helps people do that. And the other thing is that it has a powerful psychoactive effect, which I think is partly responsible for keeping people off of ibogaine. So whether or not it actually deals with the trauma directly or not is not clear to me. I think it's highly debatable, but it does open up people to having insights about the trauma or about the roots of their addiction. And that is something that, with ongoing psychotherapy or integration of work post-treatment, that's something that people can work with.
And so is there something specific that is allowing the patient that's in treatment to deal with the cravings or maybe not address them? Or is it because you hear a lot about flood doses and stuff. Is it because the flood dose is so intense that they're so focused on the trip and what's going on that they just kind of bypasses that craving phase of that 36 hours or whatever it is, where people feel like if I don't get my fix, I'm just going to die.
Well, it's not clear how it works. So it does reduce withdrawal symptoms, and it does reduce the cravings that you would have, but it's not clear how it does those things. And sorry, there's another part of that question.
Well, I was just curious if it was like the intensity of the trip itself, that you were just so focused on what was going on or trying to process that you're so in a different dimension that you're not even really addressing those cravings and stuff like that, because what's going on is way more intense than how you might be feeling those kind of withdrawal flu-like symptoms.
Yeah, well, based on the experiential reports, I could say that it clearly is a very intense thing, and a few people who I've talked with or who have written about their experiences say that it was so intense. It's just so all-encompassing that you couldn't notice withdrawal symptoms during that time. But even after the intense phase of the ibogaine is done, that's maybe 4 to 8 hours, I understand, is really the acute intense phase where you're having the visions and you have a hard time moving around, and you're experiencing lots of physical effects as well as really strong psychoactive effects. That's maybe 4 to 8 hours. And so after that period, the people still experience a reduction in their cravings. So it's not just the trip, in my opinion, but that may have something to do with it on the very short term.
Being on a college campus, we've had the opportunity to talk to some really interesting people, and we had a doctor in here who was doing a opioid study, helping people get off opioids. Obviously, there was no psychedelics or anything like that involved. It was all clinical, and they were just talking about the protocol and the program. And me and Richie really wanted to have you on. I've done iboga before, and I knew how strong of an impact it could have on someone, so we wanted to have someone who's educated to come on and talk about the matter. What does ibogaine treatment therapy look like before, during, and after on the back end?
Are you asking in part about what it's like to go somewhere to get the ibogaine treatment? Like, people flying down to often down to San Diego, they'll come down to San Diego and then cross the border and go to a clinic in Baja California, that kind of thing?
Well, what it's like to go to the clinic, and also what are people doing after they leave the clinic, or, for
re-immersion?
Re-immersion. How is that reintegration happening? Because I know with my iboga experience that reintegration is a very important thing when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a very important thing. And that would be true with, I think, probably most any, if not all, psychedelic therapies. And it's clearly true for iboga or ibogaine. And so there's a sad aspect to the fact that the treatments are only available outside of the U.S. unless you do them underground, right? Because there are so many people who are trying to get off opioids here. And so typically what they'll do is they'll go somewhere out of the country. So that's what I'm saying about the means. You have to be able to, you have to get a passport for one thing. You have to be able to take some time off and go to somewhere outside the country. And you have to have the funds to be able to travel and to pay $6,000 or so for the treatment itself. And that's what people typically do. And so if they're going to a treatment center in Mexico, they might fly directly to that place, or else they'll come down to San Diego and they'll cross the border. They'll get picked up in a car, or else they'll walk across the border and meet someone on the other side of the border, and then get driven to the treatment site. And it's so you're already taking this journey away from home, and you've got opioids with you, because otherwise you're going to go into withdrawal. And you get to the treatment site, and what they'll do is they'll say, okay, you need to cough up everything you've got. Give me all the addictive substances, what do you have on you? And that's something that people are often very reluctant to do, is to kind of give up all their opioids.
Even as they're going to treatment, they're still reluctant once they get there, huh?
Yeah, and so people who provide the treatments are usually they're people who are opioid users themselves, and they kind of came by doing the treatments because they'd had that experience, and they'd had a really successful treatment, and they think, well, I'm going to provide this for other people. So they are wise to a lot of the tricks and the things that people will do to hang on to their opioids or to hang on to their habit. So it can be tough to people don't want to give up their opioids at that point, and oftentimes will want to leave the treatment site. It's like they don't really, they want to get off the opioids, but they kind of don't. In some ways, it has such a strong grip on people. But so you get there, and you've got to give up all your opioids, but they're going to keep you on some kind of short-acting opioid. So morphine, I think, has a metabolic half-life of about 4 hours, as compared to, what's the one I'm trying to think about? Methadone has a half-life of, I think, 16 hours in the body. So what they want to do at the clinic is to put you on a shorter-acting opioid, so you don't go into withdrawal right away, and they can kind of stabilize you and get you ready for the treatment. And then once they're ready to do the treatment, they'll let you start going into withdrawal right before they start the treatment. So they have it very carefully timed as to when you have your last dose of whatever opioid you're on. And then when you're starting to go into withdrawal is when they'll give you the first dose. It's called a test dose. They want to see if you're going to have any allergic reaction to it, and then they'll ramp up the dosage from there. So, and then the experience itself is super intense, and that's a whole nother thing. So, I could go into the details on that if you want, but that's something I've studied quite a lot, and I've heard a lot of stories about what happens with people during their experiences. But it's physically and emotionally very, very taxing for people, especially when they do it for getting off of opioids. And it's also very confrontational. They'll come up against things that they didn't really want to realize, like how much harm they've been doing to people in their lives, how much harm they've been doing to their relationships, and just how much damage they've done over the years they've been using. And so these things you can't avoid them when you're on ibogaine. You're just confronted with them, and you have to kind of contend with all of that. But they're also, so it can be a really just very difficult experience emotionally, but there are also a lot of peaks that people experience where they're in these blissful states. They realize that they can transform their relationships, and they have mystical experiences sometimes, and so they're extraordinarily powerful experiences. And then people, after the treatment, they're going to stay at the treatment site for at least a couple of days because they can't do anything else. You've got to sleep for a while, and you can't usually sleep for at least 24 hours or so after you get that first dose. And so then you're at the treatment site for a while, and a lot of treatment sites will have this sort of regimen where, you come down to San Diego on a Monday, you get picked up in San Diego, you're driven down to the treatment site, you get your treatment on Wednesday, and then on Saturday or Sunday, you go back to San Diego and then fly back home. So you're typically gone for like a week at a lot of these treatment sites. You're away from home for about a week, and then you get it back home. And for the most part, there isn't any follow-up. And this is one of the tragic things about the fact that ibogaine treatment has developed the way it has in these unregulated settings, and where people have to travel. People who have the means to get the treatment have to travel there to get there. And so they get back home, and usually there isn't any follow-up. And so the chance for integration of the experiences is often squandered for that reason.
And so do you think first, what kind of numbers are we looking at in terms of success with people that are going down there? And then on the back end of that, how much more beneficial do you think it would be if this was something that could be done here in the United States, and then there could be some more like reintegration therapy or stuff going on the back end after the treatment itself?
Yeah. Of course, that all depends on how you want to define a successful treatment. In what we found and what other studies have shown is that people are going to usually go back to using opioids at some point. Now, then there's a question of when they go back to using. Do they start using a week after the treatment? Do they start using a couple months after the treatment? But in the studies, in the Mexico and New Zealand studies that we've done, I'd say that the majority of people go back to using opioids to some extent within the first 3 months. And that may sound like, it's not really working, and some people might even experience that as, it didn't work, I'm using opioids again. That all has to do with expectations, I think. So, we can compare that to conventional treatment, and there have been extensive studies done because the standard treatments being legal and being very, very heavily, very intensely studied. If you give someone either methadone or Suboxone, which are these replacement opioid therapies, to get them off of the problem opioid, and you gradually wean them off of that for, say, 4 weeks or 8 weeks, and taper them down to not using any. So this is sort of like, a very carefully controlled therapeutic environment. And then you see what happens after people stop after you've taken them off of the replacement opioids, their relapse rate is much higher than what we're seeing with the ibogaine treatment. So there's something. It's better than the standard detox, right? Standard detox would be done using methadone or Suboxone, and